Joining us on those rules, the race for 1,237 delegates rolls on as 5 more states prepare for their primaries next Tuesday. Now, as July grows near, the prospect of a Republican contested convention continues to grow. There have been only 8 contested conventions since 1876, the last one happening in 1976 between President Ford and a newcomer, Ronald Reagan. What lessons can be learned from that 1976 convention? Joining us right now is presidential historian and author of the new book, Rightful Heritage, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Land of America, Douglas Brinkley with us. Douglas, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, good morning.
Many believe that Ted Cruz's well-organized ground game can be compared to that of Ronald Reagan's insurgents in that campaign of 1976. Do you agree? Do you see similarities?
I do see some similarities, in fact, that they both did have a good ground game. But after all, Ronald Reagan had been a 2-term governor of California, a well-known figure for decades. Ted Cruz is elected once from Texas and has really been barely known by the American population. So there's a big difference in name recognition there. And secondly, that even though they had a good ground game, they ended up losing in Reagan's case to Gerald Ford. And you see Ted Cruz now millions of votes behind Donald Trump. So it's not always about the ground game. Personality often in American history will trump the ground games of candidates.
So what lessons should we be learning from that last contested convention then?
I think that obviously if Donald Trump has any kind of close to the amount of delegates he needs, let's say he's 50 short, I think he will be the nominee. Because in 76, the number 2 person, Ronald Reagan, couldn't take over Gerald Ford. The bad news is Ford lost in 1976. And I used to interview President Ford out in Rancho Mirage, California, and he never really forgave Ronald Reagan for putting that challenge on him at the convention. He felt that damaged him, just months before the general election. So the Cruz folks will have to be careful what they do if Trump has, many, many more delegates, but they're trying to win on the technicality that Trump's a few delegates short.
Doug, it's Dagan McDowell. It's so good to see you. In terms of a winner coming out of a contested convention, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last president to be elected to the highest office in the land that came out of a contested convention was FDR, was he not?
Yes.
So, go ahead.
Oh, you're correct. That's what my point being. It wasn't all the way till 1932 that you got a winner out of a contested convention. They're not very good for a party because there's so much rancor that occurs and the fight can get too ugly. And unlike 1976 or 1932, we are living in a hyper media environment where we're going to be having video streams and cell phone photos and Instagrams and watching everything under a spyglass. And I think that makes it even more important for the RNC to not have chaos coming out of Cleveland.
How do you prevent that?
I think you see Donald Trump trying to do it right now, try to make himself seem presidential, win these contests on Tuesday, kill Cruz's win streak, get as close as you can, get as many delegates if you can. But if you are just a few short, you'll turn Cruz into being the poor loser, the spoiler figure. And after all, Ronald Reagan in 1976, yes, he didn't beat Gerald Ford, but he came back 4 years later to win in 1980. So you try to convince the Cruz crowd, go for it 4 years from now. Don't be the sore loser. Don't create chaos here in Cleveland.
Yeah, that makes sense. Doug, let me ask you, Donald Trump has been critical of Ted Cruz's tactics, saying this is not how the Republican Party should be. Watch this.
I'm winning by millions and millions of votes. And we're fighting for delegates, and what they're doing is take a look. I mean, they're traveling them around, they're taking them out to dinner. You could actually take a couple of $100 million and buy an election and never win a race, because all you have to do is, take them out to dinner and send them to Paris, France for the evening. So I would say, honestly, I think it's a disgrace, and that we should not be, this is not our system, and this should not be the Republican Party.
What do you think about that, Doug? Do you think Trump has a point?
I do think he has a point, but he's also then doubled down and covered himself by saying, but the Democratic way of doing it's even worse than the bad Republican way. So it doesn't look like he's just beating up on fellow Republicans.
All right. Well, we'll be watching that. Douglas, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Douglas Brinkley there.